She slammed the door so hard the family photos rattled on the wall, then turned to me with venom in her eyes and said, "Pack your things, Dolly. We're done pretending you belong here." What she didn't know was that I'd been documenting every cruel word, every financial manipulation, every lie they'd told about me online. By the time I was finished, their perfect little empire would crumble faster than a house of cards in a hurricane. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Dolores Reed, though everyone's always called me Dolly. At 82, I've survived a depression, buried 2 husbands, raised 4 children mostly on my own, and managed to save enough money to live comfortably in my golden years. I thought I'd earned some peace. I was wrong. The trouble started 18 months ago when my daughter-in-law Cassandra called me in tears. My son Marcus had been laid off from his job at the tech company, and they were 3 months behind on their mortgage. They lived in one of those sprawling McMansions in the suburbs of Phoenix, the kind with columns that serve no purpose except to scream wealth to the neighbors. 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, a 3-car garage, and a monthly payment that would have fed my entire family for a year back in the day. "Dolly," Cassandra sobbed into the phone, "we're going to lose everything. The bank is threatening foreclosure. We don't know what to do." I'd been living alone in my modest 2-bedroom house in Tucson for 3 years, since my second husband Harold passed. The place was paid off, neat as a pin, with a little garden out back where I grew tomatoes and herbs. I had my routines, my book club, my volunteer work at the animal shelter. Life was simple, predictable, and exactly what I needed after decades of chaos. But family is family, and Marcus was my baby, even at 45. I'd raised him after his father walked out when he was 12, worked double shifts at the diner to keep him in decent clothes, and pay for his college textbooks. When he called me the next day, voice shaking, asking if there was anything I could do to help, I didn't hesitate. "How much do you need?" I asked. "Mom, I can't ask you for money, that's not why I'm calling." But I pressed him, and eventually he admitted they needed $60,000 to catch up on payments and stay afloat until he found work. It was most of my savings, money I'd earmarked for my own care if I ever needed assisted living or medical treatment. But what good was money if I couldn't help my own son? I drove to Phoenix that weekend with a cashier's check. The house was even more impressive in person, with its perfectly manicured lawn and imported stone facade. Cassandra answered the door in yoga pants that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun that looked effortless but probably took 30 minutes to perfect. "Dolly!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. "Thank God you're here. We've been so stressed, I can barely eat." She certainly didn't look like someone who'd been missing meals. If anything, she looked like she'd just come from a spa retreat. But I smiled and let her lead me into their cathedral-ceiling living room where Marcus was pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. "No, I understand the timeline," he was saying, his voice tight. "We'll have the money by Friday." "Yes, I'm certain." When he hung up, he looked at me with eyes that reminded me of the little boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," I said, pulling the check from my purse. "You just need to get back on your feet." Cassandra actually started crying when she saw the amount. $60,000, she whispered. "Dolly, you're an angel. You're literally saving our family." Marcus took the check with shaking hands. "I'll pay you back every penny, I promise." "I know you will," I said, and I meant it. This was my son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for. He'd always been responsible, always kept his word. That's when Cassandra suggested I stay for dinner. "The least we can do is cook for you," she said. "Plus, the kids would love to see their grandmother." The kids. My grandchildren, Tyler and Emma, 15 and 13 respectively. I saw them maybe 3 times a year, usually at Christmas and their birthdays. They lived in their phones, barely acknowledging my presence, except to say hi and thank you for whatever gift I'd brought. But they were good kids, just teenagers being teenagers. We sat around their massive dining table, the kind that could seat 12 people, and ate takeout Thai food from expensive-looking containers. The conversation was light, focused on their plans for the summer and Marcus's job search. He'd already had 2 interviews, he said, and was confident something would come through soon. "We've learned our lesson," Cassandra said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We're going to downsize, be more responsible." This was a wake-up call. As I drove home that night, I felt good about my decision. Yes, it was most of my savings, but family was worth more than money. I'd helped my son when he needed it most, and soon everything would be back to normal. The first red flag came 2 weeks later when I saw Cassandra's Instagram post. She was standing in front of a new SUV, a gleaming white Mercedes with the caption, "Sometimes you have to treat yourself. #blessed, #new car, #mom life." The post had dozens of comments from her friends congratulating her on the purchase. I stared at the photo for a long time, trying to make sense of it. Maybe it was used, I told myself. Maybe they'd gotten a good deal. Maybe Marcus had found a job already and forgotten to tell me. But when I called him that evening, he sounded tired and frustrated. "Still looking, Mom. The market is tough right now, but I'm not giving up." "That's good, honey," I said. "I saw Cassandra got a new car. That's nice." There was a pause. "Oh, that. Yeah, her old one was having problems. We needed something reliable." Something reliable. A Mercedes SUV that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. But I didn't push. I trusted my son. The second red flag came a month later when Tyler posted a photo from what looked like an expensive resort in Scottsdale. Pool, palm trees, room service, the works. The caption read, "Spring break with the fam." #vacation, #blessed, #living my best life. I called Marcus that evening. "How was your vacation?" "Vacation?" He sounded confused. Tyler posted pictures from a resort. It looked lovely. Another pause. "Oh, that. Cassandra's parents surprised us with a long weekend. We couldn't say no, you know how they are." Cassandra's parents. The same people who Cassandra had told me were financially tapped out and couldn't help with the mortgage crisis. But again, I didn't push. Families were complicated, and maybe there was more to the story. The third red flag was the biggest one. I was scrolling through Facebook when I saw a post from one of Cassandra's friends congratulating her on the, quote, "gorgeous kitchen renovation." The photos showed a completely transformed space with granite countertops, stainless steel appliances, and a massive island that looked like it belonged in a cooking show. This time, I didn't call. I drove to Phoenix unannounced. Cassandra answered the door in a designer dress I'd seen in a magazine, her hair and makeup done like she was heading to a photo shoot. Behind her, I could see the kitchen in all its renovated glory. "Dolly," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "What a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "I was in the neighborhood," I lied. "Thought I'd stop by." She led me to the living room, which had also been redecorated. New furniture, new artwork, new everything. The kind of changes that cost thousands of dollars. "Where's Marcus?" I asked. "He's at another interview. Fingers crossed, this one works out." I nodded, taking in the opulence around me. "The kitchen looks beautiful. When did you have that done?" "Oh, that." She waved a hand dismissively.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
We'd been planning it for months. Had to use a contractor friend of Marcus's family. You know how it is. Marcus's family. Marcus's family was me and his sister, who lived in Colorado and worked as a teacher. Neither of us had contractor friends who did kitchen renovations as favors. "It must have cost a fortune," I said. "Not too bad. We got a good deal." I stayed for an hour, making small talk and watching Cassandra fidget with her jewelry every time I asked about their finances. When I left, I felt sick to my stomach. The math didn't add up. The new car, the vacation, the kitchen renovation, all while Marcus was supposedly unemployed and they were struggling to make ends meet. But the worst part was yet to come. That evening, I called Marcus directly. "Honey, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Sure, Mom. What's up?" "Are you working? Do you have a job?" Silence. Long, telling silence. "Marcus? Why are you asking?" "Because I see all these expensive purchases. And I'm trying to understand how you can afford them if you're unemployed. Mom, I don't know what you're talking about. We're still struggling. Things are tight. The Mercedes, the vacation, the kitchen renovation. Where did the money come from? I told you, Cassandra's parents helped with some things, and we had some savings. But you needed $60,000 from me to avoid foreclosure. If you had savings, why didn't you use those first? Another pause. It's complicated, Mom. Look, I don't want to get into our personal finances with you. We're adults, and we can handle our own money. That stung. I'd given him most of my life savings, and now he was telling me our finances were none of my business. I'm not trying to pry, I said. I just want to understand. There's nothing to understand. We're grateful for your help, and we're doing our best to get back on our feet. But I knew he was lying. The evidence was right there on social media, posted for the world to see. They weren't struggling, they were thriving. And they were doing it with my money. The breaking point came 2 weeks later when I saw the Facebook post that changed everything. It was from Cassandra, and it was a photo of her and Marcus at some charity gala, both dressed to the nines. She was wearing a gown that looked like it cost more than my monthly pension, and he was in a tuxedo that definitely wasn't rented. The caption read, "So grateful to support the Phoenix Children's Hospital Gala tonight. When you're blessed, you have to give back. #charity, #blessed, #grateful, #giving back. Blessed." They were calling themselves blessed while spending my retirement money on designer clothes and charity events. The hypocrisy was staggering. I screenshotted the post and called Marcus immediately. "We need to talk," I said when he answered. "Mom, it's late. Can this wait?" "No, it can't wait. I saw the photos from the gala. You want to explain to me how you can afford to attend charity events while you're supposedly broke?" "That's not. Look, that was a work thing. Networking." "What work?" "You told me you were unemployed." "I am, but I have to keep up appearances. You don't understand how this industry works. I understand that you lied to me. I understand that you took my money under false pretenses." "Mom, that's not fair. We really were behind on the mortgage." "Were you? Or did you just want to bail out so you could continue living beyond your means?" The silence stretched on for so long I thought he'd hung up. "I think you're overreacting," he finally said. "We're doing fine now, and we'll pay you back like we promised." "When? When what? When will you pay me back? Give me a specific date." Another pause. "I don't know. Soon. When things settle down." "Marcus, I gave you $60,000. That's not pocket change, that's my security, my safety net. If you're spending money on cars and vacations and renovations, you can afford to pay me back. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You either have money or you don't. And from what I can see, you have plenty. Mom, I don't want to fight about this. I don't want to fight either. I want my money back. I can't give it to you right now. Can't or won't. Can't. Look, I'll talk to you later. I need to go." He hung up before I could respond. I sat in my kitchen, staring at the phone, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. My own son had lied to me, stolen from me, and then hung up on me when I confronted him about it. But I wasn't going to let it go. I'd worked too hard for that money, sacrificed too much, to let them spend it on luxuries, while I worried about how I'd pay for my own care if I got sick. I spent the next few days thinking about what to do. I could hire a lawyer, but that would cost money I didn't have. I could keep calling and demanding repayment, but Marcus had made it clear he wasn't interested in that conversation. I could cut them off completely, but that would mean losing my grandchildren too. Then I remembered something my first husband used to say. "Sometimes you have to play the long game, Dolly. Sometimes you have to be smarter than the people trying to outsmart you." I started documenting everything. Every social media post, every expensive purchase, every lie they told. I opened a new email account and started forwarding myself screenshots and saving them in organized folders. I created a timeline of their spending versus their claims of financial hardship. And then I started planning. If they wanted to play games with my money, I'd show them what a real player looked like. I'd been surviving and thriving for 8 decades, and I wasn't about to let a spoiled son and his materialistic wife get the better of me. The war was about to begin, and they had no idea what they'd started. 3 months passed with minimal contact. Marcus would call occasionally, usually when he wanted something, or when Cassandra prompted him to, quote, check on mom. The conversations were strained, filled with awkward pauses and careful politeness. I played along, acting like the hurt was fading, like I was moving on. But I was doing much more than moving on. I was investigating. I learned that Marcus had actually been working part-time as a consultant for his old company, making decent money but not enough to maintain their lifestyle. Cassandra had started what she called a lifestyle blog, but was really just an excuse to buy expensive things and write them off as business expenses. The kitchen renovation had cost $45,000. The Mercedes was a lease, not a purchase, but still cost more per month than my mortgage used to be. Most importantly, I discovered that they'd taken out a second mortgage on the house just 2 months after I'd given them the $60,000. They'd borrowed another $100,000 against the equity, money they'd used to pay off credit cards and fund their continued spending spree. They weren't just living beyond their means. They were living beyond anyone's means, building a house of cards that would eventually collapse. And they'd used my money as the foundation. The final straw came when I saw Cassandra's latest Instagram post. She was standing in front of what looked like a luxury spa, holding a glass of champagne and wearing a robe with the resort's logo. The caption read, "Sometimes you just need to treat yourself. 2 weeks in Bali with my love. #self-care, #blessed, #vacation, #living my best life." 2 weeks in Bali. While I was rationing my groceries and putting off a needed dental procedure because I couldn't afford it, I called Marcus that night, but it went straight to voicemail. International roaming, no doubt. I left a message asking him to call me back, but I knew he wouldn't. Not until they were back from their vacation, refreshed, and ready to spin more lies about their financial situation. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was done playing defense. It was time to go on the attack. I spent the next week making phone calls and sending emails. I contacted the mortgage company and discovered that their house was once again in pre-foreclosure. Despite all their spending, they were still behind on payments. The second mortgage had been a band-aid, not a solution. I reached out to Marcus's former employer and learned that his consulting contract had been terminated 3 weeks earlier due to, quote, reliability issues. According to his former boss, Marcus had been missing deadlines and showing up late to meetings. The writing was on the wall. I even contacted the IRS, curious about how they were reporting their income and expenses. That conversation was particularly enlightening, though I couldn't get specific details due to privacy laws. But the agent I spoke with was very interested in my information about the lifestyle blog and the business expense claims. Then I started planning my visit. Not a surprise visit this time, but a calculated one. I called Cassandra when I knew she'd be home from Bali, putting on my sweetest grandmother voice. "Cassandra, dear, I've been thinking about you and Marcus so much. I know things have been difficult, and I want to help more." "Oh, Dolly, that's so sweet of you to say. I've been looking at my finances, and I think I might be able to help you again. Not as much as before, but something to tide you over." I could practically hear her heart racing through the phone. "Really? That would be—" "I mean, we're doing better now, but every little bit helps." "Of course. I was thinking I could drive up this weekend and we could talk about it. Maybe I could even stay for a few days, spend some time with Tyler and Emma." "That would be wonderful. They've been asking about you." Lie number 1. Tyler and Emma had never asked about me in their lives, but I played along. "Perfect. I'll drive up Saturday morning." "And Cassandra? Don't mention this to Marcus just yet. I want to surprise him." "Of course. Your secret is safe with me." I hung up the phone and smiled for the first time in months. They thought they were getting more money out of me. They thought I was the same naive old woman who'd handed over her life savings without asking questions. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The drive to Phoenix felt different this time. Instead of dread, I felt anticipation. Instead of worry, I felt purpose. I had a plan, and I was ready to execute it. I'd packed light, just an overnight bag, and my laptop. Everything I needed was digital now, stored in the cloud, where they couldn't accidentally see it. I'd even changed my phone settings to prevent notifications from showing on the lock screen. No need to give them any clues about what was coming. Cassandra met me at the door with a hug that felt almost genuine. She was trying hard to be the perfect daughter-in-law, offering to take my bag and asking about my drive. "Marcus should be home soon," she said, leading me into the living room. "He's just running a quick errand." The house looked the same as my last visit, still pristine and expensive. But now I noticed things I'd missed before. The slightly too eager way Cassandra showed off their new artwork. The way she steered me away from the home office. The stack of mail on the kitchen counter that she quickly moved when she thought I wasn't looking. "How was Bali?" I asked innocently. Her face lit up. "Oh, it was incredible. So peaceful and beautiful. Just what we needed to recharge." "I'm sure. It looked lovely in the photos. Very expensive." "Not too bad. We got a good deal through a travel agent friend." Another lie. I'd done my research. Their resort cost minimum $8,000 per week, and that was before flights and meals and activities. There was no travel agent friend giving them deals. Marcus arrived home an hour later, looking harried and stressed. He hugged me dutifully but seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly. "Mom, it's good to see you. Sorry, I'm a little scattered. Work stuff." "I thought you were still looking for work." "I am, but I'm doing some freelance things. Keeping busy." "That's good. Staying active is important." We had dinner together, takeout again, this time from an expensive steakhouse. The conversation was stilted, filled with the kind of small talk people make when they're avoiding the real issues. Tyler and Emma joined us, grudgingly putting away their phones long enough to eat. "Grandma Dolly," Emma said suddenly, "are you going to give us more money?" The table went silent. Cassandra's face turned red and Marcus nearly choked on his food. "Emma," Cassandra hissed, "that's not appropriate." "But you said—" "Go to your room, now." Emma left, looking confused and hurt. Tyler followed, without being asked, clearly uncomfortable with the tension. "I'm sorry about that," Marcus said. "She's just... kids say things." "It's fine," I said. "Kids are honest. Sometimes more honest than adults." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus looked at his plate, and Cassandra busied herself clearing dishes that were still full of food. After dinner, I excused myself to the guest room, claiming I was tired from the drive. But I wasn't tired. I was ready to begin phase 2 of my plan. I opened my laptop and began typing an email. Not to Marcus or Cassandra, but to someone who would be very interested in what I had to say. Someone who had the power to make their carefully constructed lies come crashing down. The subject line read, "Mortgage fraud and financial misrepresentation. Documentation attached." I attached every screenshot, every timeline, every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The mortgage company needed to know that their borrowers had lied about their financial situation. The IRS needed to know about the suspicious business expense claims. The bank needed to know about the fraudulent financial statements. I sent the email, then wrote another one. This time to a local news station that specialized in consumer protection stories. The subject line was, "Family Scam, How My Son Stole My Life Savings." I'd written a detailed account of everything that had happened, complete with documentation. I wasn't asking them to run a story, I was just making sure they had the information in case they needed it later. The third email was to a lawyer I'd found online, one who specialized in elder financial abuse. I'd already had a consultation with him over the phone, and he'd been very interested in my case. Now I was sending him everything, asking him to begin building a case. As I sent each email, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For months, I'd been carrying this alone, feeling helpless and betrayed. Now I was taking action. I was fighting back. I closed the laptop and went to bed, sleeping better than I had in weeks. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Tomorrow, I would confront them with everything I knew. But tonight, I was just a grandmother visiting her family, carrying secrets that would soon tear their world apart. The next morning, I woke up early and made coffee in their expensive kitchen. I was sitting at the island, reading the news on my phone, when Cassandra came downstairs in her silk pajamas. You're up early, she said, stifling a yawn. Old habits. I've always been an early riser. She poured herself coffee from the expensive machine and sat across from me. So about what you mentioned on the phone, the additional help. Right, I've been thinking about that. How much were you thinking? I mean, we don't want to take advantage. Too late for that, I thought. But I smiled and said, well, that depends on a few things. I need to understand your current situation better. What do you mean? Your income, your expenses, your debts. I can't make good decisions about my money without knowing where it's going. She shifted uncomfortably. I'm not sure Marcus would want to share all those details. Then maybe Marcus doesn't need my help. The threat was subtle but clear. She needed to decide whether she wanted my money more than she wanted her privacy. I'm sure he'd be fine with it, she said quickly. He's just private about money stuff. I understand. But I learned my lesson the first time. I'm not giving anyone money without full disclosure. Marcus appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd slept poorly. Morning, Mom. You're up early. We were just talking about financial planning, I said cheerfully. Cassandra thinks you might be open to sharing some details about your situation. He looked between us, clearly confused. What kind of details? Income, expenses, debts, the basics. I want to help, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. Mom, I don't think that's necessary. We're doing fine. Are you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're living beyond your means and using my money to subsidize a lifestyle you can't afford. The words hung in the air like a bomb, waiting to explode. Marcus's face went pale, and Cassandra's coffee cup rattled against the granite countertop. That's not fair, Marcus said quietly. Isn't it? You told me you were facing foreclosure, so I gave you $60,000. Then you bought a Mercedes, went on vacation, renovated your kitchen, and flew to Bali. Where did the money for all that come from? We explained that. Cassandra's parents helped, and we had some savings. Show me. What? Show me the bank statements. Show me the transfers from Cassandra's parents. Show me the savings account you drained. If you want more help from me, prove that you were honest about the first loan. Marcus looked like he might be sick. Mom, I don't have to prove anything to you. We're adults. You're right. You don't have to prove anything to me. And I don't have to give you another penny. Cassandra jumped in, her voice shaking. Dolly, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We never meant to deceive you. Then show me the records. It's that simple. We don't have them here. They're with our accountant. Then let's call your accountant. He's not available on weekends. Then we'll wait until Monday. I could see the panic in their eyes. They were trapped. And they knew it. They couldn't produce records that didn't exist, but they couldn't admit to lying without losing any chance of getting more money from me. Look, Marcus said, running his hands through his hair. Maybe we made some mistakes. Maybe we should have been more careful with the money. But we're family. Can't we work through this? Of course we can work through this. It starts with honesty. Fine. You want honesty? Here's honesty. We were struggling, but not as badly as we said. We panicked when we got behind on payments, and we asked for help. Maybe we exaggerated a little, but we really did need the money. A little. Marcus, you lied to me about being unemployed. You lied about having no savings. You lied about Cassandra's parents being unable to help. Those aren't little exaggerations. Those are deliberate deceptions. We were scared, Cassandra said, tears starting to flow. We didn't want to lose the house. We didn't want to disappoint you. So you decided to steal from me instead? We didn't steal anything. We borrowed money from you, and we'll pay it back. When? You've had the money for 6 months, and you haven't paid back a single dollar. Instead, you've spent thousands more on luxuries. We needed those things for Marcus's career. Image matters in his industry. His industry? I thought he was unemployed. The contradiction hit like a slap. Marcus closed his eyes, and Cassandra's tears turned into sobs. Okay, Marcus said finally. You want the truth? Here's the truth. I've been working part-time as a consultant. It pays okay, but not enough to cover our expenses. We're leveraged to the hilt. The house, the cars, the credit cards, everything. We're barely keeping our heads above water. Then why the expensive vacations? Why the kitchen renovation? Because we thought things would turn around. I thought I'd get a full-time job, or Cassandra's blog would take off, or something would change. We were trying to keep up appearances until we could figure it out. With my money. Yes, with your money. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry we lied, and I'm sorry we disappointed you. But we're still your family. I sat there for a long moment, looking at these two people who had betrayed me so completely. Part of me wanted to forgive them, to pretend this conversation had never happened, to go back to being the naive grandmother who handed over her life savings without questions. But I couldn't. The damage was done, and it was too deep to repair with apologies and promises. You're right, I said finally. You are my family. But you're also liars and thieves, and I'm done pretending otherwise. I stood up and walked toward the guest room. I'm packing my things. I'll be gone within the hour. Mom, wait, Marcus called after me. Don't leave like this. We can work this out. I turned back to face them. There's nothing to work out. You made your choices, and now you have to live with them. Just like I have to live with mine. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. It means you're about to learn what happens when you mess with someone who has nothing left to lose. I went to the guest room and packed my things, listening to them argue in hushed voices in the kitchen. I could hear Cassandra crying and Marcus trying to calm her down, but I felt nothing. No sadness, no regret, no second thoughts. I was done being their victim. Now I was going to be their reckoning. As I loaded my car, Marcus came outside one last time. Mom, please don't do this. Whatever you're thinking, don't do it. We can figure this out. I already have figured it out, I said, getting into my car. You just don't know it yet. I drove away without looking back, but I could see him in my rearview mirror, standing in the driveway looking lost and scared. Good. He should be scared. Because the real storm was just beginning, and I was about to show them what 8 decades of survival instincts looked like when they were focused on revenge. The drive back to Tucson gave me 3 hours to think, and by the time I pulled into my driveway, I had a plan that would have made a chess grandmaster proud. They thought they were dealing with a helpless old woman who would cry into her tea and accept her fate. They were about to discover that decades of managing household budgets, raising children as a single mother, and surviving in a world that underestimated women had taught me skills they couldn't even imagine. I walked into my modest house and immediately felt the difference. This was my space, filled with my memories, my choices, my peace. No granite countertops or cathedral ceilings, just comfort and authenticity. I made myself a cup of tea in my favorite mug, the one with the chip on the handle that I'd refused to throw away for 20 years, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. The first email in my inbox was already a response from the mortgage company. They thanked me for bringing the situation to their attention and assured me that they would be conducting a thorough review of the loan documentation. They also mentioned that they'd be requiring updated financial statements from Marcus and Cassandra within 10 business days. The second email was from the IRS. A polite but official message stating that they'd received information regarding potential unreported income and fraudulent business expense claims, and that they would be initiating an audit of the taxpayers in question. The process would begin within 30 days. The third email made me smile. It was from the lawyer I'd contacted, confirming that he was taking my case and that he'd already begun drafting a civil lawsuit for elder financial abuse and fraud. He included a retainer agreement and explained that Arizona had strong protections for seniors who'd been financially exploited by family members, but those were just the opening moves. The real strategy would require patience, timing, and a level of documentation that would make a forensic accountant weep with joy. I spent the rest of Sunday creating what I called my war room. I cleared out the spare bedroom that had been serving as storage and set up a proper workspace. I bought a printer, a scanner, a filing cabinet, and enough folders to organize evidence that would span months of investigation. I even installed a small security camera pointed at my front door, just in case Marcus or Cassandra decided to pay me an unexpected visit. Monday morning, I began making phone calls. The first was to Marcus's former employer, the one who'd terminated his consulting contract. I introduced myself as his mother and explained that I was trying to help him get back on his feet financially, but I needed to understand his employment situation. The HR representative was sympathetic but professional. She couldn't give me specific details, but she could confirm that Marcus was no longer associated with the company and that his departure had been due to performance issues. When I pressed gently, she admitted that there had been concerns about his reliability and professionalism in the final months of his contract. "Between you and me," she said, lowering her voice, "he seemed distracted and unfocused, like his mind was somewhere else. We tried to work with him, but eventually we had to make a difficult decision." I thanked her and hung up, adding another piece to the puzzle. Marcus hadn't just lost his job due to bad luck or a difficult market. He'd been fired for cause, which meant his chances of finding similar work were significantly diminished. The second call was to Cassandra's supposed lifestyle blog sponsors. I'd found several posts where she'd tagged companies and claimed partnerships, always with disclaimers about gifted products or paid collaborations. But when I called these companies directly, pretending to be a potential advertiser interested in working with lifestyle influencers, I got a very different story. None of them had ever heard of Cassandra or her blog. The products she claimed were gifted had never been sent to her. The collaborations she boasted about online were complete fabrications. She was using these fake partnerships to justify expensive purchases as business expenses, which meant she was committing tax fraud on top of everything else. By Wednesday, I had enough information to fill 3 thick folders, but I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed more, and I needed it to be ironclad. So I decided to get creative. I created a fake social media account under the name Margaret Thompson, complete with photos I'd purchased from a stock photography site, and a convincing backstory about being a recently widowed retiree, looking to connect with other women navigating similar life changes. It took me less than a week to get Cassandra to accept my friend request. Within days, Margaret Thompson had become Cassandra's online confidant. Cassandra shared everything with her new friend, from her frustrations with Marcus's job search to her excitement about upcoming purchases. She even complained about her demanding mother-in-law, who was always asking questions about money. But the real goldmine came when Cassandra started sharing photos and details about their daily life that contradicted everything they'd told me. Pictures of expensive dinners out multiple times per week, shopping sprees that totaled thousands of dollars, even a consultation with a financial advisor about investing in cryptocurrency with money they'd supposedly borrowed to avoid foreclosure. Through Margaret Thompson, I learned that Marcus had been lying about more than just his employment status. He'd been telling people that he was taking time off to explore entrepreneurial opportunities, funded by his supportive family. He'd even pitched a business idea to potential investors, claiming he had significant backing from family money. My money. He was using my financial sacrifice as collateral for his delusions of grandeur. But perhaps the most damaging revelation came when Cassandra shared screenshots of text messages between her and Marcus, complaining about how suffocating I was, and how they needed to find a way to get me to back off permanently. In one particularly cruel exchange, Marcus suggested that they should encourage me to move to a retirement community so they wouldn't have to deal with my interference in their lives. I saved every screenshot, every conversation, every casual admission of guilt. They were building my case for me, one incriminating post at a time. By the end of the second week, I had enough evidence to destroy them legally, financially, and socially. But I still wasn't satisfied. I wanted them to understand the full scope of what they'd done, not just to me, but to their own children and their own future. That's when I decided to take a trip to their neighborhood. I rented a small, unremarkable car and drove to Phoenix on a Thursday morning, parking down the street from their house, where I could observe without being seen. I wasn't stalking them. I was conducting surveillance, gathering intelligence about their daily routines and spending habits. What I saw over the course of 3 days was illuminating. Despite claims of financial hardship, their lifestyle showed no signs of restraint. Cassandra left the house multiple times each day, always returning with shopping bags from expensive stores. Marcus spent his mornings at a high-end gym, followed by long lunches at restaurants where the average entree cost more than I spent on groceries in a week. On Friday afternoon, I watched them load their Mercedes with luggage and golf clubs, apparently heading out for another weekend getaway. As they pulled out of their driveway, laughing and carefree, I felt something inside me harden into resolve. They weren't just financially irresponsible. They were sociopaths, incapable of feeling genuine remorse or understanding the impact of their actions on others. They'd taken my money, lied to my face, and then continued to live exactly as they had before, as if my sacrifice had been meaningless. That weekend, while they were enjoying their golf vacation, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I contacted a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes, a former federal agent named Detective Sarah Martinez, who came highly recommended by my lawyer. I hired her to conduct a comprehensive investigation into Marcus and Cassandra's finances, including bank records, credit reports, and asset searches. Sarah was professional but thorough, explaining that financial fraud cases often involved layers of deception that took time to unravel. She warned me that the process could be emotionally difficult, but she also assured me that based on what I'd already uncovered, we had an excellent chance of achieving both criminal charges and civil recovery. "People like your son and daughter-in-law think they're smarter than everyone else," she told me during our initial meeting. "They leave digital trails everywhere because they can't resist bragging about their lifestyle. It makes my job easier." Within a week, Sarah had uncovered financial irregularities that went far beyond what I'd suspected. Marcus and Cassandra had opened multiple credit cards using false income information. They'd taken out personal loans by listing assets they didn't actually own. They'd even opened a business credit line using the fake blog as collateral, claiming monthly revenue that didn't exist. Most shocking of all, they'd been planning to take out a third mortgage on their house, using forged documents that claimed my $60,000 gift had been a loan they'd already repaid. They were literally trying to use my generosity against me to access even more credit. "This isn't just financial irresponsibility," Sarah explained as she walked me through her findings. "This is systematic fraud. They've been running a long-term con game, and you were just one of many victims." That phrase hit me like a physical blow. One of many victims. I wasn't special, I wasn't family, I was just another mark in their elaborate scheme to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. But I was also their biggest mistake, because unlike their other victims, I had the time, the resources, and the motivation to fight back. While Sarah continued her investigation, I began phase 2 of my personal campaign. I started reaching out to people in their social circle, not to spread gossip or seek revenge, but to subtly plant seeds of doubt about their carefully constructed image. I contacted the parents of Tyler and Emma's classmates, introducing myself as the concerned grandmother who was worried about the family's stability. I didn't make accusations. I just asked innocent questions about whether they'd noticed any changes in the children's behavior or circumstances. These conversations revealed disturbing information about how Marcus and Cassandra's deception was affecting their own children. Tyler had been asking friends for lunch money, claiming he'd forgotten his wallet. Emma had been wearing the same clothes repeatedly, telling teachers that their laundry machine was broken and they couldn't afford to fix it. The children were suffering while their parents spent thousands on vacations and luxury items. They were being taught that lying and manipulation were acceptable ways to get what you wanted in life. In trying to maintain their facade, Marcus and Cassandra were damaging their own children's development and social relationships. This revelation pushed me beyond anger into something colder and more focused. I wasn't just seeking justice for myself anymore. I was protecting Tyler and Emma from parents who were too selfish and delusional to prioritize their children's well-being. I began documenting evidence of child neglect, noting instances where the children's basic needs had been sacrificed for their parents' luxury purchases. I researched Arizona's child welfare laws and contacted a family advocacy organization that specialized in protecting children from financial abuse and neglect. The social worker I spoke with was deeply concerned about what I described. She explained that while Marcus and Cassandra's behavior might not constitute outright abuse, It definitely represented a pattern of prioritizing adult desires over children's needs, which could be grounds for intervention if the situation worsened. She also told me something that chilled me to the bone. There had already been inquiries about Tyler and Emma's welfare. Anonymous reports from school personnel who'd noticed signs of stress and inconsistent care. The reports hadn't been serious enough to trigger an investigation, but they were on file, creating a paper trail that could become significant if additional concerns arose. My grandchildren were already showing signs of damage from their parents' behavior, and Marcus and Cassandra were too self-absorbed to notice or care. That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. I was going to destroy Marcus and Cassandra completely, not just for what they'd done to me, but for what they were doing to Tyler and Emma. I was going to tear down their house of lies and force them to face the consequences of their choices. But I was also going to make sure the children were protected in the process. I called my lawyer the next morning and explained that I wanted to add child welfare concerns to our legal strategy. He was initially hesitant, warning me that involving child services could complicate our financial recovery efforts, but I insisted. This isn't just about money anymore, I told him. This is about 2 children who are being raised by sociopaths. If I can't protect my grandchildren, what's the point of getting my money back? He agreed to research the legal options for concerned grandparents in Arizona, and within days he'd outlined a comprehensive strategy that addressed both the financial fraud and the child welfare issues. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would file criminal charges for elder financial abuse and fraud, simultaneously launching a civil lawsuit for recovery of funds and damages. We would also file a formal complaint with Child Protective Services, documenting the neglect and financial instability that was affecting Tyler and Emma's well-being. Additionally, we would report the tax fraud to the IRS and the mortgage fraud to the appropriate federal authorities. By the time we were finished, Marcus and Cassandra would be facing legal challenges on multiple fronts, each one reinforcing and amplifying the others. But the most devastating blow would be social and professional. Sarah had discovered that Marcus was secretly interviewing for a high-level position at a major corporation, one that required extensive background checks and financial verification. Cassandra was in the process of applying for a business loan to expand her fake blog into what she called a, quote, lifestyle consulting empire. Both of these opportunities would evaporate the moment their fraud became public knowledge. Their carefully constructed image of success and reliability would crumble, taking their future prospects with. I spent the next week reviewing every document, every piece of evidence, every legal filing. I wanted to make sure our case was airtight before we moved forward, because once we started, there would be no going back. On the final Friday of the month, exactly 6 months after I'd handed over my life savings, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Sarah had uncovered the smoking gun that would make our case unbeatable. Marcus and Cassandra had been careless with their digital communications, using email and text messages to coordinate their lies and plan their spending. Sarah had obtained a warrant to access their electronic records, and what she'd found was damning beyond my wildest expectations. They had literally written step-by-step plans for manipulating me, complete with scripts for conversations and strategies for maximizing the amount of money they could extract. They'd researched my financial situation, estimated my net worth, and calculated exactly how much they could take before I'd be unable to support myself. In one particularly chilling email exchange, Cassandra had written, "The old bat has more money than she knows what to do with. If we play this right, we can get enough to set ourselves up for years. She won't live forever anyway, so we're really just accessing our inheritance early." Marcus had responded, "Agreed, but we need to be smart about it. Make her think she's helping family, that we're grateful and responsible. Once we get the money, we can gradually distance ourselves, and she'll be too proud to make a fuss." They had planned to rob me blind and then abandon me, leaving me alone and financially devastated in my final years. They had calculated my death into their financial planning, viewing my eventual passing as a windfall rather than a loss. Reading those emails, I felt something inside me break and reform into something harder and more dangerous than it had ever been before. They weren't just greedy or irresponsible. They were evil, plain and simple, willing to destroy their own family for material gain. I called my lawyer immediately and told him we were moving forward with everything, immediately and simultaneously. No more waiting, no more planning, no more second chances. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" he asked. "Once we start, this is going to get very ugly very quickly. They're going to fight back, and they're going to try to make you look like the villain." "Let them try," I said. "I have the truth on my side, and I have nothing left to lose." "What about your relationship with your grandchildren?" "What relationship? Marcus and Cassandra have already made it clear that I'm not welcome in their lives unless I'm writing checks. At least this way, Tyler and Emma might have a chance at a normal life with people who actually care about their well-being." He was quiet for a long moment. "All right then. I'll start filing the paperwork today. By Monday morning, their world is going to explode." I hung up the phone and sat in my quiet kitchen, listening to the clock tick and feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in months. The waiting was over, the planning was complete, now it was time for justice. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went shopping for myself, buying a new dress, new shoes, and even getting my hair done at a proper salon. If I was going to war, I was going to look the part. On Sunday evening, I cooked myself a proper dinner, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion, and toasted to the end of my old life and the beginning of whatever came next. The last thing I did before bed was check Marcus and Cassandra's social media one final time. Cassandra had posted photos from yet another expensive dinner, this time at a restaurant that charged $200 per person. Marcus had shared an inspirational quote about living your best life and not letting anyone dim your shine. I smiled as I closed the laptop. They were about to learn that some lights are meant to be dimmed, and that living your best life requires actually earning the money to pay for it. Tomorrow, their reckoning would begin, and I would finally get to see what justice looked like when it was served by someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The phone calls would start early, followed by official documents and investigators and lawyers and reporters. Their perfect little world would collapse piece by piece, revelation by revelation, consequence by consequence, and I would be watching every moment of it, finally free from the burden of loving people who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding for their delusions. The war was about to begin, and for the first time in months, I was confident about who would win. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. I woke at 5:30, made my coffee, and sat on my back porch watching the sunrise paint the desert mountains in shades of gold and pink. By the time most people were starting their day, I'd already been awake for 3 hours, and the first shots in my war had been fired. At exactly 8 o'clock Mountain Time, my lawyer began filing documents in 3 different jurisdictions. The civil lawsuit for elder financial abuse hit the Maricopa County Superior Court at 8:05. The criminal complaint for fraud and theft reached the Phoenix Police Department at 8:15. The child welfare report landed on a social worker's desk at the Arizona Department of Child Safety at 8:30. By 9 o'clock, the IRS had received our formal complaint about tax fraud, complete with documentation of falsified business expenses and unreported income. By 9:30, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit had been notified about the mortgage fraud and identity theft. I knew none of this would reach Marcus and Cassandra immediately. Government agencies moved slowly, and legal processes took time. But I also knew that once the machinery of justice started turning, it would be impossible to stop. I spent Monday morning doing normal things, almost aggressively normal things. I went grocery shopping, picked up my dry cleaning, watered my plants, and reorganized my spice cabinet. To anyone watching, I looked like a typical retiree going about her daily routine. But inside, I felt like a general who'd just launched a massive offensive, waiting for the first reports from the battlefield. The first indication that my plan was working came at 2:30 in the afternoon. My phone rang, and Marcus's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message with the kind of satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy but felt absolutely necessary. "Mom, something weird is happening. Some detective called asking questions about our finances, and there's some kind of complaint filed somewhere. I don't understand what's going on, but I think there might be some mistake. Can you call me back? This is really important." His voice had the controlled panic of someone trying very hard not to sound worried, while being absolutely terrified. I saved the message and didn't call back. The second call came an hour later, this time from Cassandra. Her voicemail was less controlled. "Dolly, what the hell is going on? We just got served with some kind of legal papers, and there's a police detective asking about elderly abuse or something insane like that. This has to be a mistake. You need to call us right now and straighten this out before it gets out of hand." I saved that message too, marveling at how quickly their tone had shifted from fake concern to barely concealed fury. The masks were already starting to slip. The third call came that evening, after I'd finished a peaceful dinner and settled in with a book. This time it was Marcus again, and this time he wasn't trying to hide his anger. "Mom, I know you're there. Pick up the phone. Whatever game you think you're playing, you need to stop it right now. You're going to destroy our family over some stupid misunderstanding about money. Tyler and Emma are asking questions, and I don't know what to tell them. This is insane, and you know it." Game? He called it a game, as if documenting theft and fraud was some kind of elderly entertainment. As if protecting my grandchildren from financial instability and neglect was a whim rather than a necessity. I deleted the message without saving it. Some things weren't worth preserving. Tuesday morning brought the first knock on my door. I was expecting it, had been watching through my front window since dawn, so I wasn't surprised to see Detective Martinez from the Phoenix Police Department standing on my porch with a younger officer I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Reed, I'm Detective Martinez. We spoke on the phone last week about the complaint you filed. Do you have a few minutes to go over some details?" I invited them in and offered coffee, which they both accepted. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd made countless family memories, and discussed the systematic destruction of my financial security by my own son. Detective Martinez was professional but warm, asking detailed questions about the timeline of events and the evidence I'd collected. She was particularly interested in the emails Sarah had uncovered, the ones where Marcus and Cassandra had outlined their plan to manipulate and abandon me. "These communications show clear intent to defraud," she explained. "This isn't a case of poor financial judgment or family miscommunication. This is criminal behavior, and the premeditation makes it much more serious." The younger officer, Detective Brooks, focused on the technical aspects of the case. He explained how they'd be working with federal authorities to investigate the mortgage fraud and the falsified loan applications. He also mentioned that the IRS was very interested in the fake business expenses and the unreported consulting income. "People think financial crimes are victimless," Detective Brooks said, "but they're not. What your son and daughter-in-law did to you is the same as if they'd broken into your house and stolen everything valuable. The only difference is they used trust instead of force." After they left, I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. Vindication, because, finally, someone in authority was taking my situation seriously. Sadness, because having police officers in my living room discussing my son's crimes felt like a betrayal of everything I'd hoped my family would become. But the sadness didn't last long, because Wednesday brought the news I'd been waiting for. Sarah called me at 10 in the morning, her voice crackling with excitement. "Dolly, you're not going to believe what happened. Marcus just got fired from that consulting gig he's been doing. Apparently, his potential new employer ran a background check and found the criminal complaint. They pulled their offer and terminated his current contract effective immediately." I sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. "How do you know this?" "Because Cassandra just posted about it on social media. She's claiming it's all a big misunderstanding and that someone is spreading lies about them. She's asking for prayers and support from their friends." I asked Sarah to send me screenshots, and within minutes I was looking at Cassandra's latest Instagram post. It was a carefully staged photo of her looking sad and vulnerable, with a long caption about how, quote, "some people will try to tear you down when you're living your best life," and how family betrayal is the deepest kind of hurt. The comments section was a mix of sympathy and confusion. Some people offered support and prayers, but others were asking questions. What kind of lies? Who was spreading them? What really happened? More importantly, several comments came from people who'd clearly done their own research. One woman had found the public records of our lawsuit and posted a link. Another had discovered the criminal complaint and summarized the charges. By evening, the post had been shared hundreds of times, and the tide of public opinion was starting to turn. Thursday brought a development I hadn't expected. Tyler called me directly, using his own phone instead of going through his parents'. "Grandma Dolly?" His voice was uncertain, younger than his 15 years. "Can I talk to you about something?" "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind?" "My friends are saying weird things about my parents. About money and police and stuff. They're showing me things on their phones, articles and posts and legal papers." "Is it true that they stole money from you?" My heart broke for him. This was exactly what I'd hoped to avoid, putting the children in the middle of their parents' crimes. But I also knew that Tyler was smart enough to eventually figure out the truth on his own, and I'd rather he heard it from me than from strangers on the internet. "Tyler, your parents took money from me under false pretenses. They lied about their financial situation and used my money for things they didn't need while telling me they were struggling to keep their house." "How much money?" $60,000, almost all of my savings." There was a long pause. "That's why you stopped visiting, isn't it? And why Mom and Dad have been acting so weird lately." "Yes, that's part of it." "Are they going to jail?" The question hung in the air like a weight. "I don't know, Tyler. That's up to the courts to decide. But there will be consequences for what they did." "What about me and Emma? What happens to us?" "You and Emma are going to be fine. Whatever happens with your parents, there are people who care about you and will make sure you're taken care of." "Including you?" "Especially me." After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and cried for the first time since this whole ordeal began. Not for Marcus and Cassandra, who'd made their choices and would face their consequences, but for Tyler and Emma, who were innocent victims of their parents' greed and selfishness. That evening, I got a call from the social worker handling the child welfare case. She'd conducted preliminary interviews with both children at school, following standard protocols for situations involving family instability and potential neglect. "Both children are aware that something is wrong at home," she explained. "They've noticed increased tension between their parents, and they've been asking questions about money and legal problems. Tyler in particular seems very mature for his age and is clearly worried about the family's future." She also confirmed what I'd suspected about the children's care. While they weren't being physically abused or severely neglected, there were signs of emotional stress and inconsistent parenting. The children had been left alone frequently while their parents went out, and they'd been told to lie to school officials about various family circumstances. "This isn't an emergency removal situation," the social worker explained, "but it's definitely a family that needs monitoring and support. The legal issues their parents are facing will likely create additional stress and instability." Friday brought the confrontation I'd been both dreading and anticipating. Marcus and Cassandra appeared at my front door at 8 in the morning, both looking like they hadn't slept in days. I watched them through my security camera for a full minute before deciding to answer. Marcus was pacing on my porch while Cassandra stood with her arms crossed, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. When I finally opened the door, leaving the security chain engaged, the venom in their eyes was unmistakable. "We need to talk," Marcus said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "No, we don't," I replied calmly. "My lawyer has advised me not to speak with you directly about any matters related to the legal proceedings." "Legal proceedings?" Cassandra spat. "This is your family, Dolly. Your own son. How can you do this to us?" "I'm not doing anything to you. I'm simply asking for accountability for what you did to me." "We didn't do anything to you except help when we needed it," Marcus said. "You offered us money, and we took it. That's not a crime. Lying about your financial situation to obtain money is fraud. Using that money for luxury purchases while claiming hardship is theft. Planning to abandon me after taking my life savings is elder abuse. Those are all crimes, Marcus. You can't prove any of that." I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. "Actually, I can. I have emails, text messages, bank records, credit card statements, social media posts, and witness testimony. I have documentation of every lie you told and every dollar you spent. I have evidence of your fake business partnerships, your falsified loan applications, and your plans to use me as collateral for additional credit." The color drained from both their faces. They'd clearly hoped I was bluffing, that my case was based on hurt feelings rather than concrete evidence. "You've been spying on us," Cassandra whispered. "I've been documenting criminal behavior." "There's a difference." "Mom, please," Marcus said, and for a moment his voice cracked with what might have been genuine emotion. "Don't do this. We can work something out. We can pay you back, make things right. But if you keep pushing this legal stuff, you're going to destroy our whole family." "I didn't destroy anything, Marcus. You did that when you decided to steal from me. I'm just making sure there are consequences." "What about Tyler and Emma? Do you want them to grow up knowing their father went to prison because their grandmother was vindictive?" The word vindictive hit like a slap, but I didn't flinch. "I want them to grow up knowing that actions have consequences, that lying and stealing are wrong, and that family means taking care of each other, not exploiting each other." "You're going to regret this," Cassandra said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "When this is all over, and you're sitting alone in this house with no family left, you're going to realize what you threw away for money. I'm not throwing away family for money. I'm protecting myself from people who threw away family for money. There's a difference." "We'll fight this," Marcus said. "We'll hire lawyers, and we'll prove that you're just a bitter old woman trying to punish us for being successful." "With what money?" I asked. "Your credit is destroyed, your income is gone, and your assets are about to be seized. How exactly are you planning to pay for lawyers?" The question hung in the air unanswered because we all knew the truth. They'd spent themselves into a hole so deep that they couldn't afford to climb out, let alone fight a legal battle against someone with documentation and professional representation. They left without another word, and I watched through my camera as they sat in their car, arguing for 20 minutes before finally driving away. Marcus was gesticulating wildly while Cassandra appeared to be crying. Whatever plan they'd hatched for confronting me had clearly failed. That afternoon, Sarah called with an update that changed everything. "Dolly, we just got word from the mortgage company. They're accelerating the foreclosure process based on the fraud investigation. Marcus and Cassandra have 30 days to either pay off the full balance of both mortgages or vacate the property." "How much do they owe?" "Just over $400,000 across both loans. There's no way they can come up with that kind of money, especially with Marcus's income gone and their credit destroyed." "What about the children?" "That's actually why I'm calling. The social worker contacted me about temporary placement options. Since you're the children's grandmother and you've been cooperating with the investigation, you're being considered as a potential guardian if the parents become unable to provide stable housing." The possibility hadn't occurred to me, but suddenly it seemed obvious. Tyler and Emma would need somewhere to go when their parents' house of cards finally collapsed completely. They could come live with me, at least temporarily, while the adults sorted out the legal and financial mess. I'd need to prepare for that possibility, both practically and emotionally. My house had 2 bedrooms, which would work, but I'd need to think about schools and counseling and all the support services that children needed when their world fell apart. But first, I needed to see this legal battle through to its conclusion. Saturday brought news that Marcus and Cassandra had hired a lawyer after all, apparently using a credit card cash advance to pay the retainer. Their attorney, a young man who specialized in defending financial crimes, had already started making statements to local media about, quote, family disputes being weaponized by vindictive relatives. The strategy was obvious and predictable. They were going to try to frame this as a family feud rather than a criminal matter, portraying me as a bitter old woman who couldn't accept her son's success. They'd claim that the money had been a gift, not a loan, and that any documentation to the contrary had been fabricated or misinterpreted. That their lawyer had apparently not done his homework, because by Sunday evening, local news stations were running stories about the case that painted a very different picture. The investigative reporter who'd initially contacted me had done extensive research, interviewing neighbors, former colleagues, and even some of Marcus and Cassandra's social media friends. The story that emerged was one of systematic deception, financial fraud, and a pattern of exploiting family relationships for money. The news report included interviews with Tyler and Emma's teachers, who confirmed concerns about the children's welfare and stability. It showed the contrast between the family's public image of success and their private reality of debt and legal troubles. Most damaging of all, it included excerpts from the emails where Marcus and Cassandra had planned their manipulation campaign against me. By Monday morning, the story had been picked up by national news outlets as a cautionary tale about elder financial abuse and the importance of family financial transparency. Marcus and Cassandra's carefully crafted image of success had been exposed as a complete fabrication, and their reputations were in ruins. But the real bombshell came Tuesday afternoon, when Detective Martinez called with news that changed everything. "Mrs. Reed, we've uncovered additional victims. It turns out your son and daughter-in-law have been running similar scams on other family members and friends. We've identified at least 6 other people who've lost money to them over the past 3 years." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident or a moment of desperation. Marcus and Cassandra had been professional con artists, systematically targeting people who trusted them and stealing their money through elaborate lies and manipulation. How much money in total? We're still calculating, but it's well over $200,000. They've been very careful to keep the individual amounts relatively small to avoid triggering automatic fraud alerts, but the pattern is clear. Among the victims were Cassandra's elderly uncle, who'd loaned them $15,000 for a supposed medical emergency that never happened. Marcus's former college roommate had given them $20,000 to invest in a fake business opportunity. Even their children's babysitter had been convinced to lend them $3,000 for supposed car repairs. Each victim had been told a slightly different story, but the pattern was identical. A fabricated crisis, an urgent need for money, and promises of quick repayment that never materialized. They'd been running these scams for years, funding their luxury lifestyle with other people's money and trust. "This changes the entire scope of the case," Detective Martinez explained. "We're now looking at federal charges for wire fraud and organized financial crimes. The penalties are much more severe, and the chances of plea bargaining are significantly reduced." That evening, I called Tyler to check on him and Emma. He sounded tired and stressed, older than his 15 years. "Grandma Dolly, some reporters came to our school today asking questions about our family. They wanted to know about our parents and money and legal stuff. The principal told them to leave, but it was really embarrassing." "I'm sorry you're dealing with this, Tyler. I know it's not fair that you and Emma are caught in the middle. Are the things they're saying true? About Mom and Dad stealing money from lots of people?" I took a deep breath, knowing that my answer would shape his understanding of his parents and his family for the rest of his life. "Yes, Tyler. It appears that your parents have been taking money from people under false pretenses for several years. It's not just what they did to me. I don't understand how they could do that. We always had nice things, went on trips, ate at expensive restaurants. I thought Dad had a good job and we were just successful. They were living on borrowed money and stolen money, Tyler. The success was an illusion. What's going to happen to them?" "I don't know yet. That depends on the legal system and the choices they make going forward. But whatever happens, you and Emma are going to be okay." "How can you be sure?" "Because I'm not going anywhere and I'm not going to let anything bad happen to you two." After we hung up, I sat in my quiet house and thought about how quickly everything had changed. 6 months ago, I'd been a grandmother who occasionally worried about her son's financial decisions. Now I was the primary witness in a federal fraud case that could send him to prison for years. But I also thought about Tyler and Emma, innocent children who were about to lose the only life they'd ever known because their parents had chosen greed over responsibility. They deserved better than the chaos and instability that was coming their way. Whatever happened next, I was going to make sure they were protected, supported, and loved, even if it meant becoming a full-time parent again at 82 years old. The war I'd started was reaching its climax, and while I was confident about the ultimate outcome, I knew the hardest battles were still ahead. Because now it wasn't just about justice for me anymore. It was about building a future for 2 children whose parents had failed them in the most fundamental ways possible. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to change all of our lives forever. The federal courthouse in Phoenix felt like a cathedral of justice, all marble columns and soaring ceilings that seemed designed to remind everyone of the weight of the law. I sat in the gallery wearing my best navy dress, the one I'd worn to Harold's funeral 3 years earlier, watching my son face a federal judge for the first time in his life. Marcus looked smaller somehow, diminished in his ill-fitting suit that he'd clearly borrowed from someone else. His expensive wardrobe had been seized as evidence, along with most of their other luxury possessions. Cassandra sat beside him in a discount store outfit, her designer handbags and jewelry replaced with items that screamed financial desperation. The prosecuting attorney, a sharp woman in her 40s named Jennifer Walsh, methodically laid out the case against them. 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of elder abuse, 6 counts of identity theft, and 4 counts of mortgage fraud. The evidence was overwhelming, documented in spreadsheets and email chains and social media posts that told the story of two people who'd built their entire lives on lies. When the judge asked for their plea, Marcus's voice cracked as he said, "Not guilty," to each charge. But I could see in his eyes that he knew the truth. The evidence was too strong, the paper trail too clear, the testimony from victims too consistent. This wasn't a trial about innocence or guilt. This was a negotiation about consequences. During the lunch recess, I found myself face to face with them in the courthouse hallway. Marcus approached me first, his face a mixture of desperation and anger that I'd never seen before. "Mom, you've made your point. You've destroyed our lives, ruined our reputations, and taken away our children's stability. Isn't that enough? Can't you tell them you want to drop the charges?" I looked at him steadily, this man who'd once been my baby boy, and felt nothing but sadness for what he'd chosen to become. "Marcus, these aren't my charges anymore. This is federal court. The government is prosecuting you for crimes against multiple victims, not just me. I couldn't stop this even if I wanted to." "But you started it," Cassandra interjected, her voice sharp with bitterness. "You could have talked to us privately, worked something out within the family. Instead, you chose to humiliate us publicly and destroy our children's future. I chose to protect myself and seek justice for crimes that you committed. Your children's future was destroyed the moment you decided to steal money instead of earning it honestly." "We never stole anything," Marcus said, but the words sounded hollow even to him. "We borrowed money from family and made some mistakes with repayment. You forged documents to get loans. You lied on tax returns. You defrauded multiple people over several years. Those aren't mistakes, Marcus. Those are choices." The bailiff called us back into the courtroom before Marcus could respond, but I could see the resignation in his shoulders as he walked away. Whatever fight had been left in him was finally draining away. The afternoon session focused on the evidence that had been most devastating to their case. Detective Martinez testified about the emails where they'd planned to manipulate me, calling me degrading names and calculating how much money they could extract before I became unable to support myself. The financial investigator walked through their spending patterns, showing how they'd used stolen money to fund a lifestyle that required an income 3 times what Marcus actually earned. But the most damaging testimony came from their other victims. Cassandra's uncle, a 78-year-old retired teacher, described how they'd convinced him to drain his savings account to pay for a supposed medical emergency that turned out to be completely fabricated. Marcus's former colleague talked about the fake investment opportunity that had cost him his children's college fund. Each victim told essentially the same story. Marcus and Cassandra had identified people who trusted them, invented urgent financial crises, and then disappeared with the money while making occasional promises about repayment that never materialized. It was a systematic pattern of predatory behavior that had been going on for years. By the time the prosecution rested their case, even Marcus and Cassandra's attorney looked defeated. During his closing argument, he focused on asking for leniency rather than claiming innocence, painting his clients as people who'd made poor choices during difficult times, rather than calculating criminals. But the evidence was too overwhelming for that narrative to hold weight. When the jury returned after only 3 hours of deliberation, their verdict was swift and comprehensive. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, giving me time to prepare for what would likely be the final chapter of this long ordeal. But first, I had more immediate concerns to address. Tyler and Emma had been living with me for 2 months by then, ever since their parents' house had been seized in foreclosure proceedings. The transition hadn't been easy for any of us. They were grieving the loss of their old life, while trying to adapt to living with a grandmother they barely knew in a house that felt foreign and small compared to their former mansion. Tyler had thrown himself into his studies with an intensity that worried me, as if academic achievement could somehow make sense of the chaos his life had become. Emma had become withdrawn and quiet, spending hours in her room drawing pictures that usually featured families torn apart by storms or monsters. I'd enrolled them both in counseling and tried to maintain as much normalcy as possible, but the reality was that their world had been completely upended. Their friends' parents whispered about them at school pickup. Their social media was filled with comments and questions about their parents' crimes. They were living with the shame of something they hadn't done and couldn't control. The night before the sentencing hearing, Tyler came to me while I was reading in the living room. "Grandma Dolly, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart." "Do you ever regret it? Turning them in, I mean. Making all this happen?" I set down my book and looked at this young man who'd been forced to grow up too quickly. "Tyler, I regret that your parents made choices that forced me to take action. I regret that you and Emma are suffering because of their decisions. But I don't regret seeking justice for what they did to me and the other people they hurt. But if you hadn't called the police, we'd still be living in our house. Mom and Dad would still be home. Everything would be normal." "Would it, though? Your parents were spending money they didn't have and lying to everyone around them. Eventually, that would have caught up with them anyway. The house would have been foreclosed, the debts would have piled up, and the lies would have been exposed. The only difference is that more people would have been hurt in the process." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know they did wrong things. I understand that now. But they're still my parents. And they always will be. Nothing that happens in court tomorrow will change that. But part of loving someone means holding them accountable when they hurt other people. Do you think they'll go to prison? Probably. The crimes they committed are serious, and they hurt a lot of people. For how long? I don't know. That's up to the judge." Tyler nodded, tears starting to form in his eyes. "I just wish none of this had ever happened." I pulled him into a hug, this boy who was trying so hard to be strong in an impossible situation. "I know, sweetheart. I wish that too." The sentencing hearing drew a packed courtroom, filled with victims, family members, reporters, and curious observers who'd been following the case in local media. I sat in the front row with Tyler and Emma, who'd insisted on being present despite my concerns about what they might hear. One by one, the victims stood to give impact statements describing how Marcus and Cassandra's crimes had affected their lives. Cassandra's uncle talked about having to move in with his daughter because he could no longer afford his apartment. Marcus's former colleague described the strain on his marriage when his wife discovered their savings were gone. A young couple who'd been friends with Marcus and Cassandra spoke about the betrayal they felt when they learned their friendship had been exploited for financial gain. Each story was heartbreaking in its own way, but they all shared common themes: trust destroyed, financial security shattered, and relationships poisoned by lies and manipulation. Marcus and Cassandra hadn't just stolen money. They'd stolen peace of mind, security, and faith in human decency. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. I'd prepared remarks, but when I looked out at the courtroom and saw my son's face, I decided to speak from the heart instead. "Your Honor, my name is Dolores Reed, and Marcus Carter is my son. For 45 years I loved him, supported him, and sacrificed for him, because that's what mothers do. When he told me he was in financial trouble, I gave him almost all of my savings without hesitation, because I believed family helps family. What I discovered was that my son and his wife had been lying to me for months, maybe years. They used my love for them as a weapon against me, exploiting my trust to fund a lifestyle they couldn't afford. They planned to abandon me once they'd taken everything I had, leaving me financially devastated in my final years. But the financial loss, as devastating as it was, isn't the worst part. The worst part is learning that the son I raised, the man I was so proud of, was capable of such calculated cruelty. Not just toward me, but toward multiple people who trusted and cared about him. I don't want revenge, Your Honor. I want accountability. I want Marcus and Cassandra to understand that their actions have consequences, not just for their victims, but for their own children who now have to live with the shame of their parents' crimes. Most importantly, I want other potential victims to see that elder abuse and financial fraud are serious crimes that will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. No one should have to choose between protecting themselves and protecting their family relationships. I returned to my seat feeling emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. I'd said what needed to be said, and now it was up to the justice system to determine what came next. Judge Patricia Hawkins was a woman in her 60s, with steel gray hair and a reputation for fairness combined with toughness. She listened to all the impact statements without visible emotion, then turned her attention to Marcus and Cassandra. Mr. Carter and Miss Carter, you have been convicted of multiple felonies involving the systematic defrauding of people who trusted you. The evidence shows that this was not a momentary lapse in judgment or a response to temporary financial pressure. This was a pattern of predatory behavior that continued for years and caused substantial harm to multiple victims. You targeted elderly relatives, exploiting their love for you to extract money under false pretenses. You forged documents, filed false tax returns, and created elaborate lies to support your fraudulent activities. You showed no remorse throughout this process, continuing to maintain your innocence even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of your guilt. Most troubling to this court is the callous way you discussed your victims in your private communications. You referred to your own mother as the old bat and calculated her death into your financial planning. You showed no consideration for the harm you were causing to people who loved and trusted you. The court must consider not only the financial harm you caused, but also the emotional devastation you inflicted on your victims and your own children. Your crimes have torn apart families and destroyed relationships that can never be repaired. Mr. Carter, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims, which totals $237,000 plus interest and court costs. Ms. Carter, you are sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. You are also ordered to pay full restitution and are permanently barred from managing any financial accounts or business entities. Both of you are prohibited from contacting any of your victims directly or indirectly for the duration of your sentences and probation periods. Any violation of this order will result in additional criminal charges. This court hopes that you will use your time in prison to reflect on the harm you've caused and to develop the moral compass that seems to have been absent from your decision-making for far too long. The gavel came down with a finality that seemed to echo through the entire courtroom. Marcus slumped in his chair as if the weight of reality had finally crushed him completely. Cassandra began sobbing, not the calculated tears she'd used to manipulate sympathy, but the raw grief of someone whose world had just ended. As the bailiffs led them away in handcuffs, Marcus turned back to look at me one last time. For just a moment, I saw the little boy he'd once been, scared and confused and looking to his mother for comfort. But that little boy was gone, replaced by a man who'd made choices that led inevitably to this moment. Tyler and Emma sat silently beside me as their parents disappeared through the courtroom doors. Tyler's jaw was clenched with the effort of not crying in public, while Emma clutched my hand so tightly it almost hurt. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions that I ignored as we walked to my car. The case had attracted enough attention that several news outlets wanted statements, but I had nothing more to say. The legal system had spoken, justice had been served, and now it was time to focus on healing. The drive home was quiet except for the soft sound of Emma crying in the back seat. When we pulled into my driveway, Tyler finally spoke. 8 years is a long time. Yes, it is. I'll be 23 when Dad gets out. Emma will be 21. That's right. Will you tell them where we are? When they're allowed to contact us again? The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on the legal proceedings that I hadn't really thought about what would happen after the prison sentences ended. That will be up to you, Tyler. When you're both adults, you can decide for yourselves what kind of relationship you want with your parents. What if we want to see them before then? Like visit them in prison or something? I looked at him in the rearview mirror. This young man who was trying to navigate impossible emotions about parents who'd betrayed everyone who trusted them. If that's what you want, we can discuss it. But right now, I think you both need time to process everything that's happened. Prison visits are emotionally difficult, even under the best circumstances. That evening, after Tyler and Emma had gone to bed, I sat on my back porch with a cup of tea and thought about how dramatically my life had changed in less than a year. 12 months ago, I'd been a lonely widow living quietly in a house that felt too big for one person. Now I was a single guardian raising 2 traumatized teenagers while managing the aftermath of a federal criminal case. It wasn't the retirement I'd planned, but it was the life I had, and I was determined to make the best of it. Tyler and Emma needed stability, love, and guidance as they rebuilt their lives from the wreckage their parents had created. They needed someone to show them that family could mean something other than exploitation and betrayal. Over the following months, we slowly began to build a new normal together. I helped Tyler with college applications, proud to see him earn academic scholarships that would ensure his education despite his parents' financial crimes. Emma started painting again, creating beautiful landscapes that showed hope and beauty instead of the destruction that had dominated her earlier work. We established traditions that were ours alone: Sunday morning pancakes, Friday movie nights, and Saturday afternoon trips to the farmer's market, where Emma would pick out flowers for the kitchen table. We talked about their parents sometimes, but mostly we focused on building their future rather than dwelling on the past. The restitution payments came in slowly and sporadically. The government had seized what assets they could find, but most of Marcus and Cassandra's wealth had been spent on luxuries that couldn't be recovered. I received about 40% of what they'd stolen from me, enough to restore some financial security, but not enough to fully replace what I'd lost. But the money had stopped being the point somewhere along the way. What mattered was that Tyler and Emma were safe, stable, and learning to trust again. What mattered was that other potential victims had seen the consequences of financial elder abuse and might be more cautious about protecting themselves. What mattered was that justice had been served, even if it couldn't undo all the harm that had been done. 2 years after the sentencing, I received a letter forwarded through the prison system. It was from Marcus, written in the careful handwriting he'd learned as a child when I'd made him practice his penmanship at the kitchen table. "Mom," it began, "I know I don't have the right to ask for your forgiveness, and I'm not writing to make excuses for what I did. I've had a lot of time to think about my choices and the harm I caused, not just to you, but to everyone who trusted me. I was selfish, greedy, and cruel. I took advantage of your love and used it against you in ways that I'm ashamed to even remember. I destroyed my children's security and stability because I was too proud to admit that I was living beyond my means and too cowardly to make the changes necessary to fix my life honestly. I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't expect you to want any kind of relationship with me when I get out. But I want you to know that I understand now what I threw away, and I regret it every single day. Thank you for taking care of Tyler and Emma. They write to me sometimes, and I can see from their letters that they're thriving under your care. You're giving them the stability and love that Cassandra and I failed to provide, and I'm grateful for that even though I have no right to be. I hope someday I can find a way to make amends for what I did, even though I know some things can never be repaired. Until then, I'm trying to become the man you raised me to be, the man I should have been all along. Love, Marcus." I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in the drawer with all the other important documents from this ordeal. It was the first genuine apology I'd received from him, free of excuses and manipulation, and while it couldn't undo the past, it offered a small hope for possible redemption. Tyler found me sitting at the kitchen table with tears in my eyes. "Bad news?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. "No, sweetheart, just complicated news." "From Dad?" "Yes. He wrote to apologize and to thank me for taking care of you and Emma." Tyler sat down across from me, this young man who'd grown so much in the past 2 years. "Do you think he means it?" "I think he's learning to mean it. Whether that leads to real change remains to be seen." "Would you ever forgive him?" "If he really changed, I mean." I considered the question carefully. "Tyler, forgiveness isn't something you do for the person who hurt you. It's something you do for yourself, to free yourself from carrying anger and hurt. I've already forgiven your father in that sense, because I refuse to let his choices poison the rest of my life. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean trusting someone who's proven themselves untrustworthy. Your father will have to earn that through years of consistent, honest behavior if he ever can. Do you think he can? Change, I mean. I don't know. People can change if they really want to, and if they're willing to do the hard work it requires. But they have to want it for the right reasons, not just because they got caught or because they're facing consequences. Tyler nodded thoughtfully. I hope he can. Not because I want to forget what he did, but because I'd like to think that people aren't permanently broken just because they make terrible choices. That's a very mature way to look at it. I learned from the best, he said, giving me a smile that reminded me why all the pain and struggle had been worth it. As I write this, 5 years have passed since that day in the courthouse when I watched my son led away in handcuffs. Tyler is in his second year of college, studying business ethics with a passion that suggests he understands the importance of integrity in ways his father never did. Emma is a senior in high school, planning to study art therapy so she can help other children who've experienced trauma. They both write to their parents occasionally, maintaining a distant but civil relationship. Marcus has 3 more years on his sentence, while Cassandra was released last year to a halfway house. Neither has attempted to contact me directly, respecting the court order that protects me from unwanted communication. My life is quieter now than it was during those intense months of investigation and legal proceedings. But it's fuller too. Tyler and Emma have brought energy and purpose back into my days, reminding me that family isn't just about blood relations, but about the people who choose to love and support each other through difficult times. I still think about that night when I decided to fight back against people who saw me as an easy target. I think about the choice between being a victim and being a survivor, between accepting injustice and demanding accountability. I chose to fight, and while the battle cost me more than I expected, it also gave me more than I imagined. It gave me the chance to protect my grandchildren from parents who'd lost their way. It gave me the opportunity to help other victims find their voices and seek justice. Most importantly, it gave me the knowledge that I could stand up for myself even when doing so meant standing alone. The house is full of laughter again, filled with homework sessions and teenage drama, and the comfortable chaos of a family that's learning to trust each other. My savings account may never fully recover, but my faith in my own strength has been restored completely. Sometimes the price of justice is higher than we expect to pay, but the cost of accepting injustice is always higher in the end. I learned that lesson later in life than I would have preferred, but I'm grateful I learned it at all. They thought they could make me homeless, financially devastated, and emotionally broken. Instead, they made me stronger, more determined, and surrounded by people who actually understand what family means. In the end, that's the best revenge of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.